Hey everyone, today I'm joined by Dave Scilabro. Dave is the founder of Harvest ROI, which is a RevOps agency that specializes in helping companies turn their CRM into a revenue generating machine, not this black hole of leads, chaos, complexity that you normally see. I wanted to talk to Dave to break down why so many companies waste their HubSpot investment and how Dave's team approaches CRM architecture, operational alignment, and long term revenue enablement like engineers. So I thought that would be helpful for everybody. In this episode, we discuss why bad data leads to total team disengagement and how to stop the snowball, the importance of team wide EQ in unlocking client adoption, how they build long term retainers by tying CRM work to quarterly revenue goals, and more. No one was asking for another community, but I made one anyway. So, what's different? The dynamic agency community is designed around access rather than content. Access to peers who've done it before, access to experts who've designed solutions, access to resources that have been battle tested. And right now, the price for founding members is only $97 a year. Join today so your agency has immediate access to everything you need to grow. You can join at dynamicagency.community. And now, Dave Scilabro. It's easier than ever to start an agency, but it's only getting harder to stand out and keep it alive. Join me as we explore the strategies agencies are using today to secure a better tomorrow. This is Agency Forward. What made you decide to niche down into HubSpot and RevOps instead of staying full service?
Specifically, I think it was the opportunity, right? When we came into the HubSpot ecosystem, I came in as a go-to-market and turnaround consultant, and I was just advising clients and working with clients on those strategies, their go-to-market strategies, their brand and product positioning, and then mostly it was like all their operational processes. That's where I found most companies falling down was what happens when the lead comes into the system, and then how does all of that follow? And I had actually worked with a couple other HubSpot agencies doing the implementation work and thought, man, I feel like I could do this a lot differently, right, than the way that I'm seeing a lot of the other agencies do this, because they led a lot with marketing and they led a lot from top funnel. And then just in my experience, I think most people didn't struggle with top funnel. They struggled with what happens with the lead, how they get the lead qualified, how they drive that lead through that process of developing that lead IQ, the intent and qualification, moving that effectively to sales, how sales delivers on marketing's promises and what information and data they're collecting, and how does sales set that up for the operational piece, which is either the fulfillment or onboarding or the delivery of the product or service, right? And I always felt like that was the part that fell down. And when I had worked with agencies in the past, everybody focused on, let's write blogs, let's get forms set up, let's bring in more leads. But again, if you're just bringing in leads and don't know what to do next, that's the place I saw a huge opportunity in the ecosystem. And that's kind of how Harvest was born.
I think it also, on some level, it comes down to where it's like people find the easy option. So like top of funnel is like the easy part. Everything else is like way harder. So people just gravitate towards that.
Yeah, this is complicated, this part.
Right. We see it within the agency coaching space. It's like agency operations. You can find hundreds of coaches like right now. If you just type that in. Agency like revenue coaches, very hard to find because driving revenue in an agency is way different than like a B2B tech or SaaS company.
Correct.
So yeah, I see that all the time here as well.
I think one of the things I found too, and this may go back to my past life as a CMO and a CRO at a national finance company, was just leads are a commodity, right? You can buy leads, you can create leads, you can bring leads through, but again, if you don't qualify them and you're dealing with bad leads, you find like your sales reps are sometimes dealing with 9 out of 10 leads they can't even close. Once all of that data is in the system, most companies don't even do anything with it. They don't keep those leads on a leash. They're not working those leads. They're not dispositioning the leads early, right? So they don't have a disposition for leads. They don't have a disposition at close lost. They don't go back and nurture. They're not trying to win those leads back. And so they're in this process of constantly bringing in new leads and burning them. And, the cost per acquisition isn't, you're not improving that cost per acquisition,
Right.
which is it's going to decrease your overall
Mhm.
value of your company.
So what kind of things are you looking at once they got these leads in? What's the first step?
So the first step is the first step in any CRM is obviously the data architecture, right? Understanding
Mhm.
the data so that eventually we can go back and make actionable decisions on that data. But beyond that, we're really looking at, the pre-sales process to start. I mean, that pre-sales process could be, everything that we do that, a lead comes inbound. Like I said earlier, we need a lead to have IQ, right? Intent and qualification. So whether that lead's coming inbound, they've raised their hand, they're showing intent.
Mhm.
How do we qualify them, right? What are the qualification requirements to, who do we route it to based on their qualification? Where's it going? Are we setting up our reps based on wills or skills or territory alignments, other things that we're going to be sending those leads off? I see a lot of people having some processes where I'm going to get the leads first and then I'm going to review those and manually assign those. Completely inefficient.
Mhm.
So how do we create a more efficient process for qualifying those leads, getting those leads into the hands of the people who can further qualify them and move them downstream? The other side of pre-sales is really what a lot of businesses do, and HubSpot wasn't really set up 4 years ago, but they've obviously changed. We were one of the leaders in that, is like looking at what the outbound activity is. So a lot of companies, especially B2B organizations, are looking at ideal customer profiles. They're looking at targeting accounts because there's only so many accounts they can sell to in that space. So they want to target, they want to bring that data in. So if we're going after that data, hopefully they're qualifying them right before they bring those prospects into the CRM. Then the job is, how do we drive intent, right? So
Mhm.
what does that outbound activity look like? Are we enrolling them in sequences? Do we have LinkedIn automation? Are we building an influencer network? Are we looking at channel partners to help bring deals in, right? So all of that
Mhm.
outbounding activity also goes into your pre-sales activity, right? Because they can come in from either direction. They can also come in from referrals and other sources, but it's usually two directions. You're either going outbound or you're coming inbound, and there's two different paths that we need to go
Mhm.
through to get them to become sales qualified leads and put them into a sales funnel so that sellers can actually close these deals.
Right. So niching into kind of this focus, knowing where the rest of the market was headed, how did that kind of play out for you? Like, as far as, were you winning better clients? Was it easier to win clients?
I
Were
think it
easier to stand out?
I think it was, it was easier to stand out. It was easier to win clients because what we would talk about with people is, hey, you're looking for somebody to do your demand generation. That's not us. What we do is we align your operational processes, data architecture, people, and systems together so
Mhm.
that you're going to close more deals, so that you're going to manage that data better. And that really resonated with a lot of people because they knew that that's what their problem was that wasn't being addressed.
Mhm.
And I think that also gave us, helped us build an influencer network because there's a lot of failed CRM implementations that are done by marketing groups, that are done by people who, hey, I've used the HubSpot or the Salesforce CRM. I'm familiar with CRMs. Let me build it internally inside the company.
Yeah.
And we've seen how that turns out, right? And I
Yep.
always tell people that, like, you can buy a Lamborghini, you can drive a Lamborghini, or you can build a Lamborghini. It's easy to buy the Lamborghini if you have the money. You probably need to learn how to drive it, but it's going to
Mhm.
be a lot easier to learn how to drive it or know how to drive it than it is to know how to build it,
Mhm.
right? And so people who think that they have experience think they can do all three of those things, and it doesn't really pan out like that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us because we also started to look at, hey, how do we start to niche into not going out and looking for net new sales and convincing people to buy the software, but how many of these implementations are out there that aren't complete, that aren't built out the way that they should be
Mhm.
built out? There's so much opportunity there. Let's focus on that as our niche, And then how do we find an influencer network to introduce us to all of these people?
Yeah.
Um, it came with its own set of complications. Obviously, we're not industry agnostic. We're not industry specific. We're industry agnostic,
Mhm.
which makes for its own set of challenges. But also, I think creates a lot of opportunities by seeing what other industries are doing. Once we can assess their revenue models, see their processes, and you do this enough, you can start cross introducing these processes to other industries and saying like, hey, have you ever thought about doing it like this? We've seen this done before.
Mhm.
And, introducing something that's not industry specific to give them an edge.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap that you can find if you know what beats you're supposed to hit.
Right.
But definitely, so as a former HubSpot agency CEO, the number of onboardings that we would get from HubSpot, and we'd work through it, a month process, and someone on their team was like, I've used HubSpot before. And then you check
Correct.
back in with them, 2 months later, 90 days later, whatever it is. And they haven't adopted anything because everything you set up, that person, as soon as you left, that person in the company said, no, we need this. And then they completely just scrap stuff, and it never actually gets built out with an actual system, like what you guys are going into building. And so, yeah, huge opportunity. And it's impressive that you were able to identify that and then
Yeah.
use that as a source of leverage.
I think the difference too is like there's a huge difference between an onboarding and a strategic
Like
implementation.
implementation. Yeah. Agreed.
Right. I think a lot of people are like, hey, we just need to get onboarded. We need
Yep.
to get to use the system. And a lot of people are expecting it to do everything they want it to do for their business
Mm-hmm.
right out of the box or once you turn it on. And every business is unique, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
living organism just like we are. And there's no two businesses that are identical. They all do something a little bit different. And if you're not capturing that in their processes, then you start to sacrifice adoption of the users, right? Because if it doesn't fit seamlessly into how they work or what their work process is, then they're not gonna fully utilize it, which means then the data model gets compromised, and your data and your decision making ability gets compromised.
Right. Something, actually, I brought this up on a podcast earlier today. I was at a retreat, and someone mentioned, like, as soon as the data doesn't jive within a platform, your team that references that data is going to stop accessing it. They're just going to stop going into it,
100%.
and because they know it's useless. And so now it only gets harder to get everybody back into that platform to actually use it. How do you go about
Yeah, I was
training,
going to say,
teaching your
sorry.
client to do that? Like,
So yeah, once that happens, then it just picks up momentum, right? One user stops doing it, one user, and then it snowballs. It gets worse. So what we do is we have something called the RevOps hierarchy of needs. It's sort of loosely based on that same framework as like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but we build this and show this to clients, and it becomes a problem solving framework for how a good CRM should be set up. At the very bottom, foundationally, is that data architecture, right?
Yep.
What's the data structure that we need to make sure that we can segment people for marketing, right? How are we going to communicate to people by role, by industry, by where they are on the buyer's journey, by what products they own, all of those different things. How are we going to filter the data for sales opportunities? Where are they in the pipeline? Where are they in the journey? Who are the decision makers in this process? All of those things need to be considered in the data model. We start to look at products. There's a million ways to start to look at data. Integrations from other systems. Do we need custom objects in the data architecture? All of these things start to, they'll make a difference when we get to reporting. But if we start with a good, solid data architecture, the next thing we look at layering is people and process alignment, right? So we've got the data. Now, what does that process look like from pre-sales to handoff to sales, the handoff to post-sales, customer support, customer service, all of those things? And how do those processes support the data model, right? Because we can't collect all the data at the beginning. We can't collect all the data at the end. It's a linear process where we're talking to this prospect or client throughout the entire buyer's journey, from lead through the sales process, through onboarding or fulfillment, and we're collecting data right? And that architecture that we develop should give us the data points that we're collecting based on the data architecture. Anything that we can't collect in the data architecture is typically enrichment, right? So like firmographic, demographic type data that we want to bring in to learn more about like market penetration and things like that, we may be getting from external sources. Once people and processes are aligned, then we need to look at adoption and enablement in the hierarchy, right? We need to make sure that the team has access to the tools, they know how to use it, and what are the activities that we're doing that are going to drive adoption of this system. If we've got good, solid adoption and enablement, the next thing we're looking at is your reporting and analytics. And if the three things in the bottom are aligned, your reporting and analytics are going to be good. And then at the very top of that pyramid is your ability to make strategic analysis and make actionable decisions based on your data. And then at any point in that, as the business iterates, you change products, maybe you're changing a market that you're going after, the business changes externally, and we need to make a change, and you start to go, hey, I've got a gap in my reporting here and I can't seem to support it. Now we have a framework to solve the problem of, okay, can't see the information in a report. Is the data structure there to support the reporting? If yes, then we go to, is the people and processes aligned that are fulfilling that data? And if yes, then we know we have an enablement or an adoption issue, right? But now we can start to go in and figure out where it's missing and fill in the blanks. And so that's how we go from like a RevOps optimization engagement where we're building that foundation and structure to how do we go through the cycles of iterating, problem solving, right? Finding that actionable insight and going up and down that hierarchy to find the information, make decisions, and make the changes to drive revenue forward.
I'm envisioning your HubSpot account as being just perfect.
Our HubSpot account? No. No. You've worked at an agency, the cobbler's children have no shoes.
Right.
But it's getting better every day, right? It gets better every day, but it's not it's not as tight as we make our clients. But it's improving over time. I don't want to come in here and tell other agency owners no, ours is perfect.
Yeah, it is Solomon's paradox, where we're great at everyone else's problems. But everything you just said was probably simplified and is actually way more complex than what you're actually doing. Like, how do you go about like maintaining that level of quality of your work when you bring in new team members, you're working with new clients, especially like cross industries? That's a lot, right? There's a lot of details that you're looking at with this. Even if you have, this hierarchy of needs, there's still a lot going on there. How do you kind of maintain that quality?
There is a lot. So one of the things that we do different, I think, than a lot of agencies is, our projects we have project managers in every project. That keeps the project tight. That keeps things moving forward. Mm-hmm. We also have a philosophy of, we make sure that we help align the client's vision, their goals. There's a framework for the solutions engineer, the RevOps strategist, the client success manager to work within, whether that's our optimization framework or our RevOps framework that we have in place that allows them to sort of solve the problems in a particular order of operations. Mm-hmm. And then you need to hire really smart, talented people who, really understand it, really get it, and then just empower them to do the best work possible, and then have a series of checks and balances to make sure we've got quality insurance in place so that there's always two sets of eyes looking on something before it gets released to a client.
Right. Even there, it feels like it's way more complex than
it is complex, but I think that's where our niche is. Our niche is working in the complex and doing the jobs and doing the optimizations that nobody else wants to do.
Right. Well, and
because they need to be done.
Right.
Somebody needs to do it.
And I have a philosophy. You can sell complexity as long as it's in its simplest form. Mm-hmm. And so we want to show clients this is everything going on in the background. There's a lot here, but you don't have to worry about that. You just have to look at these three things. We'll do the rest. And so now you've sold yourself as the go-between. So you're protecting me from all of that chaos by giving me these few simple things to focus on.
Right.
And so let's shift gears to so as you've been growing this agency, what are some of those leadership lessons that you've pulled out? Things like that, going through re-niching, just growing a business in general, right?
Yeah, I think one that's really served us well is our philosophy around hiring, right? And it's just like I said, you got to hire really smart people who really get it, who really want it. You need to pay them well, right? Agencies never succeed by underpaying people. You get a lot of employee churn.
Yep.
So employee retention is super important in building a really strong agency. And then you need to have some things that support the culture around that. Right? And I go back to people more than I go back to anything else when it comes to building an agency. Because to have momentum, you need to have a team, and that team needs to grow. They need to solidify, and new members need to come on and feel like they're part of that team from day one. And continue to grow that team. And so we do some things very differently. We focus on a structure of servant leadership, right? So every leader in this company is there to support the people that are working for the company, right? So at the very bottom of the organizational chart is myself. I'm there to support the leadership team. The leadership team is there to support everybody else. It's not the other way around, right? We're there to help serve everybody else. Another major component of that is how do we work with the EQ of people? Because the EQ of our team is just as important as their skill set. If they can't communicate to clients, if they can't identify that a client is under stress, and by the way, anytime you're doing any of these projects, your clients and your team is under stress, especially if they're not aligned. And the first job that our team has is to identify that if that team is out of alignment, there's got to be one or two members of that team who are under stress about this project. We're making changes. So if you think about a really successful project, you're bookending it with change management and adoption, right? At the very front is that change management. So if we can identify the people who are experiencing or displaying stress behaviors and help them unpack their needs and understand it, let them be heard across the rest of that team, and we can get that team aligned. Now we can start to build a really successful process that everybody is going to have buy-in on because they participated on, because they were aligned. And then at the end, it's going to help drive a lot better adoption.
Right. So let's say the client does have like full adoption, you got everything in. Do you have something set up for like a next offer where you actually work with them on an ongoing basis to maintain all of their systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the dream for everybody. I think there's a lot of agencies that kind of do the one and done. That's just you, but you're constantly chasing pipeline.
Feast and famine.
Right? Feast and famine, right? You're chasing pipeline because you're completing a project and then you need to fill that pipeline to do other projects. But I think people always need this expertise on some level. Like we talked about earlier, a business is a living organism, right? You set it up once, it doesn't mean it's not going to iterate. Right. It should iterate. If it's not iterating, it's dying, right? If you're not moving forward and you're not changing, you're moving backward and you're dying. So I think there's a lot of organizations that need help, and the smart organizations will keep us on. But we have offerings post the implementation or the optimization of the full CRM and the architecture. One is a RevOps engagement, right? What are we doing to help drive revenue forward? So that continuous loop of what's our quarterly revenue goals? What's our quarterly goals? What are our sprints to help make sure that we're fulfilling those goals and launching campaigns? What are the QBRs to make sure we're going back and seeing how we did? How do we realign what next quarter's goals are so that we're driving revenue forward? And if the team has people like that on board in sales operations or revenue operations who are adept at that, then we're also there to just support them on an ad hoc basis because they will always need that expertise. Software is always changing. HubSpot released
especially with HubSpot
200 this year alone. We're only in April still. So there's always new features, new AI that's coming out, new things that you can do, new workspaces that can help improve that work. that even if you've got a team that's solid that has adopted HubSpot, it doesn't mean they're going to start rolling out all of these iterations that are going to make it better. So I think as long as you're thinking about that in terms of how you're building that relationship with the client to not just set that foundation, but help them drive revenue and support them long term, then I think you've got a good business model, right?
Yep. So you just brought back a story. When I was a marketer at my last agency, I jumped on a call for HubSpot onboarding. I was going to show them like the settings menu and how they could work through certain things. And HubSpot had moved the settings from the top to the side. And
Daily.
I jumped on and was like, I have no idea what's going on anymore. Like, did I break something? How do you, with those 200 changes that HubSpot's already brought out, how do you make sure your entire team is up to date on all of these changes and fully trained so that they don't run into that same issue?
So we have a Slack channel, right? So as people are identifying updates, seeing updates, we have a Slack channel that we post the updates. We talk about how it applies to us. We've also brought in a new director of marketing who's freaking awesome. And so he's now doing like internal podcasts to generate the data with our team, to talk about those updates, to talk about how they're applicable, so that we're all staying fresh and on top of it, and not just looking at Kyle's LinkedIn post, right? Got to be a little bit more than that. So that constant communication as a team is super, super important. Teams that don't communicate, you're losing this, because if you've got 20, 30 people on your team and they're all in HubSpot in different areas every day, somebody's going to, put their finger in the mousetrap, right? Yep. I mean, I do it. I know I do it when I'm doing the same thing that you're talking about. They changed the menu the other day. Yep. And I was like, oh, I can't find it, right? One, I think you have to be, if you get caught in that situation on the call to client, be humble, talk about all the changes that HubSpot's making, and, you've got to be adaptable, right? But I think, even when HubSpot's making those changes, the UX is always so intuitive. It takes you about 30 seconds to figure out what happened and where to go, right? It's not, it's the PC versus the Mac scenario as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
So I feel like it's always at least intuitive enough to figure it out on the fly.
Yeah. So, okay, speaking of changes, the market is continuously changing. And since you're hitting multiple industries, that's a lot of other changes to kind of keep up with. How are you also staying on top of all of those to know how you can best serve those clients as things are changing?
So it depends I guess it depends on the client, right? Since we're so industry agnostic, I think it makes it a lot easier for us. We're not as easily affected. Like right now, I know that HubSpot agencies, for example, that niche manufacturing as their vertical, there's so much uncertainty with tariffs and everything else coming along. That doesn't affect us the same way. Since we're industry agnostic, there's different industries, and it's like the stock market. Even when the stock market's down, people make money. So if you're diversified enough in your approach, I don't think we ever get hit and we get affected that way, right? Because we're not targeting one specific vertical for our business. It really does help us just kind of go where the need is.
Right. Well, awesome. Dave, this has been insightful, but I got two more questions for you.
Sure.
With first being, what book do you recommend every agency owner should read?
You're going to laugh, but I've got stacks of books. These two, Traction and EOS, those are prerequisites. My favorite is Ask More, right? Because if you're consultants, the worst thing you could do is not ask questions. So this book is a great book written by Frank Sesno about how to ask questions, written by a journalist, right? So if you get in that mindset of asking questions, you're in good shape. The Growth Gears by Art Saxby and Pete Hayes. They own a company called Chief Outsiders. Great framework for go-to-market strategies. And then Leaders Eat Last. And this is no joke. You asked me this, but these things were just sitting on my desk because these are books that I go back to and read a lot.
Yep.
And then I also read a lot of like Harvard Business Review. I have a subscription to that, and always new ideas, new things that are being introduced. It's a great subscription to have.
Yeah, I feel you on the reading.
Yeah.
I've kept this question in the podcast purely for myself. So hopefully guests find value in it, but it's like, I just got 2 more books that I haven't heard of that I added to my list.
I do all the time. Same thing. I hear a book on a podcast or something. The first thing I do is I go to Amazon. I buy the book.
Yeah, that's my wife probably gets angry at me for buying before even considering the book.
Before considering,
Yeah,
I just have them, and
the books. It's just
I kind of force. You know what happens a lot is I'll buy the book, and then I'll be on a road trip, and I'll just download the audiobook. So I'll buy it twice, and I'll end up listening to it, and then I'll use the other one as a reference. But
right,
I just it's like a trophy for me.
Yeah. So I actually did that with Seth Godin, All Marketers Are Liars. And I was listening to it at the same time I was reading it, and I'd never done that before. But it was like, it was awesome. Like I was hearing everything twice. It was like all the ideas stuck a lot faster. It was it's cool.
I've got books on the shelf back there. I've got books in boxes. I've got books that I've read. I feel like if you're not continuously reading, you're missing. Right.
100%.
And I think the new reading is podcasts, right? I think you get more information out of podcasts much more quickly because things are changing so rapidly right now. Yeah. Having a good, rotation of podcasts of where you're getting your information, how you're getting your information is also, I think, super important.
Yeah. And I think with the changing of even the publishing industry, it's like if you have a 1-page summary at the end of every chapter and I could just read that summary, this didn't need to be a book. And so it's like, it's disappointing in a lot of ways where it's like, I want your ideas. I want the stories, but like sell me throughout the book.
Yep.
But
I've got AI tools I use for that too.
Last question is, where can people find you?
People can find us at harvestroi.com. That's harvest, return on investment, harvestroi.com.
Awesome.
We're on LinkedIn, and you can find our website, or you can find us in the HubSpot partner directory.
All right. Well, Dave, thanks for joining.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate you having me on.
That's the show, everyone. You can leave a rating and review, or you can do something that benefits you. Click the link in the show notes to subscribe to Agency Forward on Substack. You'll get weekly content, resources, and links from around the internet to help you drive your agency forward.